Basketball and graffiti, I mean, it's like hand in glove.
I was the promotion department for a television station the last 6 months I was there. I mean, I was the whole department.
There was something sexier about what these artists were doing on the street. There was something dangerous about it, something urgent, something immediate.
You're basically fired whenever you walk out of a studio because there's no guarantee they're going to use you again.
We're so blown away how the players themselves reacted to the artwork.
It was on the circuit of summer stock theaters back in the days when there was a circuit of summer stock theaters.
There was so much respect going both ways from the player to the artist.
So it's the life of a gypsy. You have to love the process so much you're willing to do it for essentially free for the rest of your life.
I say this as a joke all the time, but if I want to do a shit show, then I can.
One of the reasons Cleveland is a joke is it's a K word. So it's funny because it starts with K.
We're coming around the bend on season 1 of the podcast. And today I want to welcome back 2 of my previous guests who both gave me, well, just too much great material to fit into single editions. But don't think of this as a meal of leftovers, even though I happen to love leftovers. I mean, who throws good stuff out? Never mind. In this Redux edition of Promo Cowboys, we'll hear more from street artist Billi Kid and voice artist Ralph Gunderman. These guys are both sort of larger than life and have great histories, which I hope you had a chance to listen to in previous editions of the podcast. If not, I recommend you go back and listen to those episodes before you take on this one. We're going to start with Billi Kid, who is right now involved in a super cool project with the NBA, meshing street art, basketball, and some of the biggest stars in sports. I was kind of saving this one on purpose.
Basketball and graffiti, I mean, it's like hand in glove. I mean, a lot of the artists come from urban backgrounds, and they use art as a way of escaping the ghetto, if you will. And a lot of basketball players did the same. You know, they use their art, the sport, as a way to succeed in life. And so there's a lot of synergy between both. Certainly you can't go to any blacktop court in the city or anywhere else without graffiti all around you. So it's already part of the imagery, part of the vernacular. So it was a natural fit. You know, it just makes so much sense, more so than with any other sport.
Okay, I think most of us can conjure the synergy between street basketball and street art and graffiti. They're all part of the urban landscape. So how did Billi Kid, a guy who's not at all into sports, find himself working with the NBA?
Billi Kid originally, you know, it started as my alter ego to create art and to find a path to making a living as an artist, as a fine artist. But along the way, I fell in love with the community. I fell in love with the genre. Having spent, you know, more than 20 years in advertising and working with great photographers, with great illustrators, you know, I've seen a lot of fine work. But there was something sexier about what these artists were doing on the street. There was something dangerous about it, something urgent, something immediate. And as I got to know them, I became passionate about their work, passionate about street art, and I started figuring out, you know, or thinking about, you know, how do I create exhibitions and how do I create new things that could bring this work to a whole different audience, you know, not just the people that are, you know, sort of street art followers or love the genre. You know, how do we put it in front of interior designers? How do we put it in front of people that follow sports and whatnot? So, you know, having some marketing chops, I started, you know, coming up with concepts that I thought could be funded by brands, and you know, started doing exhibiting and becoming a curator and creating these exhibitions that started making some noise. You know, several exhibitions into this process, I met my partner Bill Fickett, who was interested in working with me and collaborating on you know, the street art world. And he happens to have a huge connection to the NBA, and one thing led to another. And the NBA saw an exhibition that I had just finished curating with Herman Miller and the Eames Foundation, where we took 20 Eames chairs and painted them to hang in Barney's windows.
Quick note here for the uninitiated. Barney's New York is an exclusive department store known for lavish window displays. Like every other department store in New York, pretty much.
Sal LaRocca, who's now the president of the NBA, saw the exhibition and said, boy, I'd love to do something with graffiti and street art and basketball. And we came up with the art of basketball.
Another quick note, Billy's talking about the NBA's president of global operations and merchandising, Salvatore LaRocca, who set up Billy and his fellow street artists with 36 top-of-the-line NBA backboards to use as a canvas. The glass, the rim, the net, everything.
This is in 2010, and he gave us 36 backboards, and we did an exhibition at Art Basel in Miami.
And these are portraits done by different artists that are sourcing, I think they're sourcing existing photographs, but they're just super, just pop right out at you, and they speak to the personality of the player. There's a LeBron James one, of course, and you did the Carmelo image, but the one of Kevin Garnett I think is very strong. And there's maybe I'm wrong, but maybe there's a Kobe Bryant one.
Correct.
I mean, it's a new dimension of art. It's something very new that I think that's part of the reason this is really becoming a success.
Such a slam against my talent made me hotter than a mink, and I swore that I would write it for amusement or for kink. It was nothing.
A lot of people came to see it. It was at Art Basel, which is the biggest art expo in America. Sold out the entire show. The following year, they gave us an entire court, the 2011 All-Star Court, and we cut that up into pieces and gave that canvas to the artist.
And you're talking about the hardwood itself, right?
Exactly. The NBA puts on an all-star game every year, and they create an entirely new court for that weekend game. And generally what they would do in the past is they would donate that court to a college campus because it's a brand new court. So in 2011, after our successful exhibition with the backboards, they came to my partner and I and said, hey, would you guys, like to take this court? And we were like, yes. So they literally gave us the entire court from the game, which has beautiful graphics on it to begin with. And, when you cut it up into pieces, they become even more powerful. And then we made a canvas out of it, and we had graffiti artists paint basketball players or basketball-centric art. We actually had some of the players come and participate and host some of the shows. And my partner and I were so blown away by how the players themselves reacted to the artwork, because all of a sudden they were not just looking at images of themselves, which is flattering, but also it's on the court, it's on what they play on. There was so much respect going both ways, from the player to the artist to the canvas to the league. And so that was our second year. Our third year, we decided that why don't we up the game a little bit and get a player to actually become the artist. And so I came up with this whole concept of transforming a famous basketball player into an artist, and we hired Dwayne Wade, put him on the court, the 2011 All-Star court that we own, and gave him buckets of paint and basketballs, and he went Jackson Pollock all over the court. So the art of basketball was the first time that the NBA had fine art as part of their licensing program. So it's a whole new category. And then now with player-generated art, that also became a new category within the genre.
Is video of D. Wade doing the art itself available on the web?
Sure. We have websites for both programs. We have the art of basketball is aobnba.com. And then we have a website for Wade's art, which is itpwade.com.
So you can see shots of him, getting all painted up, and he's just covered in paint himself, and he is bouncing a basketball that's been dipped in paint on the court and doing the Jackson Pollock thing, as you say.
Absolutely. That was game number one.
And can these images be viewed at the same website? What's that website again?
AOBNBA.com, and AOB stands for Art of Basketball. Another great thing about it is that it's officially licensed artwork by the NBA, and so you could see some of the images there. You could see some of the work for sale.
And going back to the work you did with the 2011 All-Star Court, some of what I think is most interesting about it is the way that you cut it. And the court is, 4 inches thick or so.
Correct.
So you're using a canvas that is basically this hardwood, and it's already been painted and lacquered, and you're sort of painting over that.
Well, in general, a basketball court is a giant puzzle, and it's made up of sections that are 8 foot by 4 foot, which are then put together and taken apart. it is so thick in a sense because it has to be built to be assembled and disassembled without issue, and of course you have these giant players bouncing all over it. So we have these sections that are quite large and too large actually and heavy, to paint singularly. So what we did is we found this new technology, which is water jet technology that literally cuts like butter right through the court, the all 4 inches of it, and you can cut different shapes out of it. And generally, a lot of people cut with laser cutters, but because it's wood, that would burn the edges and burn the lacquer.
The edge is so perfect. It's so fine. It's really spectacular.
I mean, can you imagine if you put your hand through this thing, it would be such a clean cut that
It's like a lightsaber.
Exactly. You probably wouldn't feel it for for 10 seconds until you realize what the hell happened. It's like butter, and it cuts. I mean, this is wood, but it cuts through marble and up to 5 inches and 5 inches of steel. So you can only imagine the power of this water jet. It's literally like it's as thin as a needle, but it's literally water being shot at incredible pressure.
Right, and the shapes are you can see the edge of the wood with the shape, and I've seen the stars that you hung at the most recent showing you had. You want to touch it, you want to rub it against your face almost. It's that kind of art. Now, I like the NBA as much as the next guy, especially in the postseason. But these art of basketball pieces add a figurative and literal dimension to love of sport. Take the rendition of the classic Jerry West NBA logo. It's a precision-cut piece of that 2011 All-Star court, gloriously splattered by Dwayne Wade, with explosions of blue and yellow at the hips and stripes along the head and the feet. The piece embodies love, honor, respect for the past, and ownership of the present, plus a whole lot of attitude. Heck, I ain't no art critic, as Promo Cowboy might say, only it makes me feel something powerful.
Part of the sad part of it is that the challenge of getting this in front of people and the expense of that. And I mean, just to move, when we do an exhibition, it's basically a $50 or $60 or $80,000 proposition just to get the work into crates and getting a space and setting it up and all the money that it takes to create an exhibition. And but when we do it and we get it in front of people, their jaw drops. It's so amazing. They're so blown away by it. It's so what we're doing now is we're evolving the art of basketball and in the paint and putting that under one umbrella, which we're calling the NBA Lab, which then becomes an experimental piece of the licensing game and allows us to take some of this imagery and work with smaller brands to bring product to market.
That's cool. So I wanted to ask you about how you're moving into consumer goods and apparel and that sort of thing. Some sort of high-end apparel for women, but also some sort of mid-market stuff, even for kids, right?
Well, I mean, with the NBA stuff, it's all about licensing. But part of what I've always wanted to do, in addition to curating and doing street art, is to have my own brand and to bring some of this wonderful art onto apparel and then turn it into market. And so in the last 6 months, I started my own brand called Graffitication, and I literally went out and bought a direct-to-garment printer. And I'm taking some of the imagery that I've worked with some of my favorite artists and putting that onto T-shirts and making a go of it. It's also been very challenging, and but I ultimately my goal is to have a revenue stream that allows me to support my creative stream.
A revenue stream to support my creative. I'm sorry, say that one more time.
I want a revenue stream to support my creative stream.
Yeah, that's what every artist should want, it seems to me.
Absolutely. Well, you would hope you can create without the revenue stream, but in most cases, unless you're independently wealthy, that's unattainable. And or you can be a starving artist, but then I'm not single. I have kids. I have a house to maintain, and so the reality of it is I'm a working stiff. And my hope with all these other branding things that I do with the NBA and other brands is to generate income so that I have enough of a revenue stream where I can do my own thing. I don't have to, I say this as a joke all the time, but if I want to do a shit show, then I can. So if I want to paint shit, and I know people are going to tell me not to do so, but if I had my own revenue stream, I'll move forward with it.
Yeah. So tell me how any listener can look into this apparel that you've moved into.
The easiest way to see anything that I've done is to go to billikid.com, BILLIKID.com. And there under curation, I have links to all of the projects I've done with the NBA and other brands. But for my apparel brand, if you want to go directly to that, it's called Graffitication, just like gratification, but it's Graffitication. So graffitication.com is where you can see my newest venture.
Cool. So what about your artwork and incorporating it into private spaces? How can one, if somebody's listening and says, I want to buy one of his pieces?
Certainly, it's also been challenging. I've had some successes and I've had some failures, and I have work available for sale. But people could come to me and commission a piece. So if you want a portrait, that's doable. If you want something specific, I can work around that. Or if you just like what I do and want to look at the inventory, then certainly they can reach out, via my website, billikid.com. Or info@billikid.com and start a conversation. In the meantime, as I do set up my own exhibitions, that's another vehicle for me is that I get my personal work in conjunction with all the other people I curate around and get my work out to the public. So obviously, it would be great to have gallery representation, which is how I started this game. Is how do I cross that line and beat the gallery system? Needless to say, I don't have gallery representation yet, so that would be another great step in my career as an artist.
Indeed. All right. Hey, this has been great, Billi Kid. Wonderful of you to join us. And just in listening to you, and I've known you now for a good 20 years, but in listening to you hear the story of your career, story of your life, pretty much. You've been very independent throughout, and you, sir, are a promo cowboy.
God bless.
My thanks again to Billi Kid. And while I'm here, this edition of Promo Cowboys is brought to you by Bourbon, Beer, and Bar Pretzels, and by Promo Cowboy, a TV industry crime novel by yours truly, Barry Fitzsimmons, available at your finer bookstores and at Amazon.com. Next up,
I would guess I consider myself an actor because that's what I took most seriously as a craft. And the voiceover business was, for about a dozen years, in my mind, merely how I supported my acting habit.
That sounds kind of familiar. Kind of like, what was it? A revenue stream to support your creative stream? My guests today indeed seem to have that in common. And next on the Promo Cowboys podcast, we'll hear again from Ralph Gunderman, one of New York's premier voice artists. Turns out Ralph has a pretty unique history, starting of all places in seminary, then summer stock theater, and in local radio and TV, where it turns out he was himself a bit of a promo cowboy.
I was the promotion department for a television station the last 6 months I was there. I mean, I was the whole department. So I did everything from press releases to screening programs, editing promos, voicing promos. So when the time came when New York, in the mid-'80s, people suddenly started noticing that there were people doing promos and making money for Showtime and HBO, and my agent was very on it. I knew that task backward and forward, so it worked well. But I quit my last full-time job in 1973 and pursued as seriously as I could theater in Cleveland, not in any scholastic setting, but serious community theater, classes here and there where I could get them, and worked part-time as an announcer for a network affiliate, an ABC affiliate in Cleveland.
Was it originally a plan, or you were like, this is what I do? How did you go from the stage to doing voice work?
It was kind of a round trip. I was in a Catholic seminary through freshman year college. studying to be a priest, which seemed like a less and less good idea as time went on. And I was in Cleveland, Ohio. That's my hometown. I quit a month into my sophomore year because I said, I can't stay here. And I went to the University of Akron because it was away from home, but not too far away from home. I had a friend that was going there. And really, for no reason that made any sense, I decided I'll study engineering. It was a good engineering school. And that lasted a semester. Then I switched to a speech and theater major, which was not the strength of the University of Akron. My senior final for acting, which I got an A on, I just flat out did an impression of Walter Matthau in The Odd Couple. It's a good payoff scene, and probably everybody will remember it. They're in one of their arguments, and Felix has prepared a dish of linguine. And Oscar in the argument keeps saying, referring to it as spaghetti. And Felix says, it's not spaghetti, it's linguine. And the last line, Oscar takes it, throws it against the wall and says, no, it's garbage. The thing was, I wasn't acting.
Rye whiskey, I know you of old. You robbed my poor pockets of silver and gold.
So, can I assume that you originally planned a career as a stage actor?
Having been raised by people who were young adults in the Depression, I was very security-minded. So I decided that I want to perform, but I'm not going to try to go into theater. I'll go into radio. And the radio department was no better than the theater department, but there was a little carrier current station that broadcast from the power lines into the dorms, and that's as far as it went. But it was entirely student run. And when I decided I was going to do that at the end of my first semester of engineering, which was right before summer vacation, I went and auditioned, and they said, great, come back in the fall. We want to use you. And I came back in the fall, and most of them had flunked out. And so, but I started working there with those who were remaining, and a week into it, they said, we want you to be program director. And I said, okay, what's a program director? So it was really, it was from scratch, and it was great. 2 years later, the freshman orientation class came in a week early, and we went on the air for that, and they thought we were an AM rocker out of Cleveland.
The very first thing I ever did in radio was at a college station in Boston. I'm the guy who didn't follow through when I should have, and they said, hey, can you do a promo? I said, sure. I'd never done a promo before. I had no idea that that's where I was headed in life. And so I did a kooky promo where I did some voice work with some other guy, and I read like a Valley boy. And they were like, man, that was lights out. Are you going to be back? And I'm like, yeah, sure. I don't think I ever walked into the building again.
Oh, yeah.
'Cause I was too busy trying to get good grades and partying, and I wasn't smart.
So I went into radio, I got bored. I went into television, I got bored. And said, at that point, I said, I'm going to go after theater. That path gave me both the conventions of the broadcast industry and gave me a lot of acting tools. So I got to do a lot of, and I was a big fish in a small pond. I was a good actor in a place where a good actor can get almost any role. In a big market like New York, it doesn't matter how good you are if you're meat.
On a $10 horse and a $40 saddle, I'm going to punch them Texas cattle. Come-a-ki-ya, yippee-yi-yay, come-a-ki-ya.
I was, looking around on the internet, and there's surprisingly little of you out there, but I did find some old press photos of you as it looked like Cyrano, and then something you with the cast of Bullshot Crummond.
Yes, they were both in Cleveland. Cyrano was at Kane Park, which is kind of known. I did a few shows there. Actually, the summer before Cyrano, I did my all-time favorite role, Jack in the Ruling Class, which is a very sassy British satire from the 60s. And Peter O'Toole played the part in the West End and also on film. But we had only 10 performances because we had to vacate the premises because they were going to shoot Those Lips, Those Eyes with Frank Langella in Kane Park, which is a film about summer stock in the 40s.
In Cleveland. In
In
Cleveland.
Kane Park,
Okay.
in this because it had been a very big relative. It was on the circuit of summer stock theaters back in the days when there was a circuit of summer stock theaters, and so this was set in that era. Our consolation prize was because this was August and it was hot,
Yeah.
it was humid, and wigs and beards and all sorts of stuff.
Are we outdoors? Are we indoors?
We're outdoors. We're in a covered pavilion, the Alma Theater in Kane Park. But because Those Lips, Those Eyes were moving in and had already moved in to an extent, we had air-conditioned trailers, which was unheard of. Prior to that, we had ancient brick with cement floor dressing rooms. So that was nice.
Trailers are nice. That's a little
Yeah.
taste of feature film work there.
But because acting very rarely makes any money, and even if you get to the professional equity level on stage, it doesn't make an appreciable amount of money. So the voiceover acting, and it is acting when it's good, I think, supported the stage acting until such time as I just decided I did not want to live the life of a stage actor. New York is a casting center, but most of the professional work most actors get in New York means, oh boy, I've got 6 weeks at this repertory theater up in Syracuse to do a show, and you go out of town. So it's the life of a gypsy. You have to love the process so much you're willing to do it for essentially free for the rest of your life. It didn't make sense to me to do it to try to become a star in any sense of the word.
Sort of like writing novels, I think.
Yeah.
Like Betty had a baby, bam-ba-lam, like Betty had a baby.
So before coming to New York, you did a year in LA and 9 years in Cleveland. And my question is, how could you stand doing a year in LA?
What I learned from some stand-up people, friends in New York, was one of the reasons Cleveland is a joke is it's a K word. So it's funny because it starts with K. That's like one of the
Cleveland. Cleveland.
And a flammable river and things like that help too.
When my dad and my family was together, we lived in Detroit for about half my childhood. And my dad was traveling a lot. He'd travel to Cincinnati a lot. He'd travel to Cleveland a lot. He was doing something with the Ford account. I think he was working with dealer associations or something. But he used to say to me, cheer up, you could be living in Cleveland. And I thought, how dare you say that? We live in frickin' Detroit.
Cleveland is actually a very, very livable place. And it had a music scene I miss to this day in terms of not only quality, but accessibility. And it had a reasonably good theater scene.
What was your year in LA like?
Actually, the year in LA included a couple, it included one, what they call equity showcase, which is a place where equity actors can work if the audience is not bigger than 99, and it's considered, they showcase their work, and agents and so forth might come and see it. So I got a review in the LA Times, which referred to me as having a latex face. But it was fairly kind. It was in William Saroyan play, Time of Our Lives. But I did not, Los Angeles was not my cup of tea. The air irritated me, and the people irritated me.
And hence, you live in the Northeast.
And hence, I survived LA in part by running away to Santa Monica and Venice whenever possible, where there was an ocean breeze and things were just more chilled.
What year was this, Ralph?
This was 1976.
Okay.
And I got signed by a large, one of the big agents, Cunningham. And then as far as I could tell, I got shelved because I never got any auditions. I would call up with some excuse to call up, and they say, oh, well, There's this script if you want to come in and read it tomorrow. I eventually was befriended by a place that I did go and do an audition, a guy who became a very big casting person in LA, and got a much better idea how to work into the voiceover side. And it wasn't through a large agent. But by this time, I was already getting kind of sick of LA. And I took the advantage of leaving Cunningham because they hadn't gotten me any work. So even if you had a contract, you could leave under SAG rules. And I ended up with another large agent, large agency. And the voiceover guy was completely lukewarm, but turned into the same thing. But the on-camera person was very supportive. And I actually, while I was out in LA, got 2 on-camera network commercials, and they went a long way toward paying for that year. And I was going to workshops, just to work on the voiceover craft. Mm-hmm. But I decided I don't want to live here. I'd much rather be back in Cleveland. And when I told the guy in the workshop, he said, "Oh man, you're totally marketable. You could make it here." And I said, "I don't want to live here. I'd rather live in Cleveland."
Yeah.
And my on-camera agent, the commercial agent, said, "I could have had you on a series in a year." Her name was Meryl Jonas, wonderful woman. I said, "Meryl, I have trouble sitting through a half hour of that. How would I work 70 hours a week on one?" I just wasn't attracted to any of it.
Well, you knew yourself. Good for you.
Yeah.
I would have taken it in a heartbeat.
So I went back to Cleveland, did a lot of really good theater, and was very successful voiceover wise. And then in '81, I came to New York and got off to a fast start.
I was cleaning out some old tapes, and I found a 1988 recording of an old show that I loved on CBS called Wise Guy. And in the commercial break, I heard you doing a commercial for Certs.
If you're tired of little mints that are made with sugar, now there's a choice. New from Certs.
I didn't realize you'd done work on some feature films, Short Bus, Red Betsy, Making Mr. Right.
I have never appeared on camera in a feature film. I think you listed all the feature films in which I did any kind of voice work. You thought I was on camera in Making Mr. Right, which was a Susan Seidelman film. I actually was the voice of a mechanical parking guard, which John Malkovich has an interaction with. My favorite of maybe 6 different voiceover sessions for feature films was for a film called Red Betsy, which was set in the early 40s. And there was a scene where this family is hearing on the radio for the first time, the morning of December 7th, that there's been an attack on Pearl Harbor, and they wanted a 1940s style news read, which, was a lot of fun to try to recreate.
How did it sound? Something like...
There, a little bit of a monotone and rounded syllables because I am the voice of authority. A little Westbrook Van Voris sort of thing, like at 7 a.m. this morning in Honolulu, in Pearl Harbor, the Japanese attacked the United States Navy, that sort of thing.
Beautiful. Thank you for that.
As I've often said to people when they ask me to, say something, I need a script and an expensive German microphone. Then I sound good.
I thought you sounded great just then. It's getting time to wrap things up with Ralph, and he's got a final anecdote to pass on for all the freelance cowboys in the world. Those who appreciate my Getting Fired in America stories, take a listen.
You're basically fired whenever you walk out of a studio because there's no guarantee they're going to use you again. I would work occasionally for HBO, and I did a promo for, it was an odd thing, I don't remember what it was, but it wasn't the usual HBO promo kind of approach on this thing. And there were people beyond the promo producer who had interest and opinion in it. So we did it, and he directed me in kind of an odd way, and that was that. And then he booked me again, and they said, well, he said, we want to do it a little differently. And he directed me in yet another odd way, but he was pleased. He got what he wanted, and he had to call up this person who had to approve it. And I was working in a studio that I knew well, with an engineer I knew well, a producer I knew fairly well. And the engineer patched the telephone into my headphones and had it on speakerphone in the studio. And the producer calls this person up, plays the spot for her. There's silence. And she says, "Okay, am I on speakerphone? Take me off speakerphone." So he turns off speakerphone. She says, "Now, it's just you and me, right?" And he said, "Yeah," but it wasn't, because it was still in my headphones. And she said, "First of all, fire that goddamn announcer." And this struck me as so funny. I started giggling so badly that I got out of the booth and walked through the control room trying not to make a sound. It was so cliche, First of all, fire the announcer. But the opposite of getting fired that way is what would happen at auditions. And I auditioned somewhere, I don't remember where it was an advertising agency, and they said, "Thank you, thank you." I walked out, and I'm walking down the hall, and I hear somebody running behind me, and I turned around, and it was the writer. And she came up to me and said, "I just wanted to thank you. That was absolutely great." She was just effusive in her praise. And I said, "Well, thank you very much," And on the one hand, it made me feel nice. On the other hand, being an experienced freelance person, I said, "Well, forget that gig." And of course, I never heard anything, because that's the kiss of death.
As usual, this edition of the Promo Cowboys podcast has been brought to you by Bourbon, Beer, and Bar Pretzels, and by Promo Cowboy, a TV industry crime novel by yours truly, Barry Fitzsimmons, available at Amazon.com and your finer bookstores. And you can find the ebook at the Amazon Kindle store. Thanks for joining me. This is Barry Fitzsimmons, aka Promo Cowboy. I'm interested in your feedback. Reach out to me on Twitter at Promo Cowboy, also on Facebook and LinkedIn at Barry Fitzsimmons. I'd like to thank my guests today, Billy Kidd and Ralph Gunderman. I also want to thank freesound.org and the Pond 5 Public Domain Project for providing the music you heard on this Promo Cowboys podcast. The Promo Cowboys podcast theme is by 4 Barrel Carb. You're hearing it now in the background. Got a sort of electric Robert Johnson thing going for it, if you ask me. Thanks to my support team, Jared Minero, Charles Berlepsch, and Zach Trinka. Thanks to Patrick Fitzsimmons for creating the Promo Cowboys podcast artwork. Promo Cowboys is a Steve production. Steve is a division of Igloo Media, LLC. This podcast was produced by yours truly, Barry Fitzsimmons. Thanks again for joining me. As Promo Cowboy says, shoot, got time for one more, don't you think? Take us out.